First Person Advisors is now a subsidiary of NFP, the fifth largest insurance broker in the world, combining local expertise with access to global capabilities and solutions. Learn more at firstpersonadvisors.com.
1987, I do solemnly proclaim open the 10th Pan American Games in Indianapolis, Indiana, in the United States of America.
The 87 Pan Am Games, a proud and pivotal moment in Indianapolis history, is a turning point for the little engine that could, the Midwest city that did and continues to do, a community that has proven it can punch above its weight class.
And with Super Bowl 46 in Indianapolis in 2012, we were center stage. All eyes were on Indiana.
A key visionary in putting Indiana on the global sports map, native son, Indianapolis born and bred, Mark Miles, now a driving force behind IndyCar racing and the greatest spectacle in racing.
Drivers, start your engine! This is the Indianapolis 500 for everybody to see! Colton Herta, he moves inside of Scott Dixon.
Whether it's running the show at the world's most famous race, playing a major role in hosting a Super Bowl, or organizing an international sporting event that forever changed the course of Indianapolis, he has been in the thick of it all.
Back home again in Indiana.
Mark Miles, proud Hoosier, who's made an everlasting impact on his hometown. He's my guest this week on the Business and Beyond podcast. Hello and welcome to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. I'm Gary Dick. Mark Miles grew up on the near north side of Indianapolis, just south of Broad Ripple. One of 5 kids, walked about a half mile to school as a boy, rode his bike to Little League Baseball. He graduated from North Central High School, went on to Wabash College, where the political bug bit him. He worked for well-known Indiana Republicans like Bill Hudnut, Dick Lugar, and Dan Quayle, even moving to Washington to briefly serve as chief of staff for then Senator Quayle. Eventually, Miles returned home to Indianapolis, serving in the corporate world, later as an executive on the professional tennis circuit, before finding his calling as a key player in helping to evolve Indianapolis as a world-class big event city. And I'm pleased to be joined by Penske Entertainment President and CEO, Indy's own Mark Miles, on the podcast this week. Mark, always great to be with you. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks, Gary. It's always a pleasure.
How are things in the IndyCar world right now? It's, I guess, kind of maybe the calm before the storm. You're getting ready to ramp up the season. How are things?
Well, I guess publicly it's a calm before a storm.
Right.
We sort of never sleep. We're so excited about this season, both for the 106th running in May, which we're nearly 100 days out from. So really the level of public exposure picks up. And we're a couple weeks away from our first IndyCar race in St. Petersburg, Florida, which looks like it's going to be a fantastic event. So, yeah, all the indicators are really good. We could talk the rest of the hour about it, but we're continually making progress. And it used to be kind of 2 steps forward and 1 back. I feel like, notwithstanding the pandemic for the last couple of years, it's been a whole lot more forward with any back steps. So we feel great about it.
Yeah. Talk about that, because as you mentioned, we are taping it. This is actually going to drop right after the St. Pete race, so right before that race. But there just seems to be a lot of momentum, continued momentum, a changing of the guard to an extent. We had Mario Andretti on the podcast last week, and he talked about that change, and he was really upbeat and positive about it. The young guns, the new names, the new faces, and how excited he is about where IndyCar racing is right now.
What a great ambassador for the sport he is. He's seen it all, and he could be looking in the rearview mirror because of his remarkable, legendary career. But he's always looking forward, and he's a big ally and help. No, he's right. I mean, it all starts with the sport, right? What happens on the track. And we've got all these narratives, all these stories, international, US, young bucks trying to push out the established, not just veterans, but champions, a range of countries and established stars that have brought with them millions and millions of fans, like Grosjean when he comes from Formula One in France. He comes with an audience that wants to see everything that's going on. And then there's the young guys like Pato Award, who's captivating not just Mexico, but Hispanics in this country. So there's just so many stories. And then we're careful to try to manage value for team owners. So that's the cost benefit formula. We try to manage costs while keeping the racing compelling. And we try to keep gaining exposure for them so they can bring in more financial underwriting. And now we really have more demand than we have engines and equipment to supply.
Yeah.
So it's a that's a great problem to have. I don't know that I really consider it a problem.
Yeah.
Scarcity and the opportunity for teams to get in is probably not a bad thing.
Yeah.
So we just feel great about hitting on all cylinders, if you don't mind the pun.
Speaking of change, momentous change, obviously at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, Roger Penske buying IMS, the IndyCar series. Sure, there's a lot you could talk about, but how would you describe the Indianapolis Motor Speedway under the ownership leadership of Roger Penske and his organization?
The first thing I might do is tell you a story about how Roger, for the last 2 summers, has brought 2 of his teenage grandsons who live on the East Coast of the U.S. And they've come in here for 2-3 weeks, and they go out to work hard. I mean, they're sweating in the summer, whether it's on the golf course, on the grounds, lugging equipment around. I think Roger does that for 2 reasons. The first, many of us thought was important for our children to make sure they understood what hard work and sweat meant. But more profoundly, I know he thinks that he wants his grandchildren to understand this is theirs and they are stewards of it. And they should be identified with it and understand it and care deeply about it for generations to come. So listen, that's the key to the story. Then there's Roger and his incredible success in business, in global business, in the automotive sector, which obviously relates to what we do in racing, and his success as a racer. So, and his experiences here at IMS. So, I mean, everybody said this, but I really know he's the perfect owner, and his family will be great trustees for years to come.
Yeah. His work ethic, of course, legendary. Any stories you can share with us that kind of illustrate the work ethic of a guy who's beyond 80 years of age?
Oh, call my wife, and I'll tell you one story. I don't have any particular ringtones on my phone except one. When Roger calls my mobile, back home again in Indianapolis.
Oh, I like it. Yeah.
And so that has occurred on any number of occasions where everybody kind of giggles. But no, he gets stuff done. He works very hard. His attention to detail is unbelievable. So I'll try to tell you one quick story. I hope you won't be angry with me telling it. He had the opportunity to build a new yacht. This was a 4.5-year project that was being constructed in the Netherlands. And given his attention to detail, whether it's aesthetic or engineering, layout, functionality, he was on everything. It's a big project, and it was going to be very visible, right? So it had to be just perfect, although he never says it that way. So he and I are in a restroom right outside my office looking at how we're going to, paint it and put the LED lights up and how to arrange the mirrors exactly and how to fix the waste baskets. And at one point, 25th visit to the same restroom, I kind of rolled my eyes. And he reached out and he touched my forearm and he said, "Mark, I can't help it. It's just the way I am. I've got to see it, and see it and move it and until we know it's just right. And then we go." And he does. I mean, there's no hesitation once he's there. He said, take the boat, for instance. He said, we're down to looking at the layout of, I don't know, it's at least 4 levels. So they're sending me blueprints the size of a normal blueprint for a level. He says, an end table is that big. What am I going to do with that? So he flew over and they rented a very substantial warehouse and they mocked up all the furnishings, all the interior to scale out of styrofoam. So they could tell, does it feel right walking between this bar and this end table or this couch and this chair? And it's just astonishing that a guy with a 60,000 person business empire really can find the time to execute better than anybody I've ever seen in whatever he touches. The capacity to do that is just something amazing that has to do with both effort and attention to detail.
Yeah, that's a great story. Hey, think back, because you became CEO of Holman & Company, the previous owners, of course, at IMS I guess you began in 2013. And you really didn't know much about racing, right? I mean, obviously you're an Indy guy, you're very familiar with the track and IndyCar, but in terms of racing, you didn't know a lot. Do you have a steep learning curve?
Oh yeah. And you're right. I mean, unabashedly, I knew nothing about racing. I'd been running the men's professional tennis circuit worldwide, which meant being out of the country more than 50% of the time on tennis business from 1990 through 2005. So I was not following racing. But I'd done two things that I thought maybe would give me a foundation to add some value. One was big events. You mentioned in the introduction the Pan American Games and some others. And of course, we have the granddaddy of the big events, the Indy 500. And the other was run a league. So we ran the tour, which was the league for men's professional tennis globally. And what is that, right? That's making rules. It is technical regulations of the game. In that case, it's more strings and balls and court speed. It is finding sponsors, communications, very substantial overlap in the things you've got to know how to do. Now, it's amazing how, and a big part of a league, whether it's Goodell or tennis or IndyCar, is having the ability, hopefully, to bring your stakeholders together. If they're all dissonant and on different pages, you just can't make progress. So being able to communicate and get alignment with stakeholders is another commonality that was hard in tennis, frankly, harder than IndyCar. Although my friends all said, you're crazy. You think you can get those IndyCar drivers on the same page? Good luck. Not the drivers so much as the owners. So I think there was a lot of overlap. But no, I didn't know anything about cars. We've got a lot of people who do. We've got great engineers. We've got people who run what we call comp and ops, competition operations, that been doing it all their lives. And I just had to try to get quick enough, as smart enough as quickly as possible, so I could ask the right questions and ensure, that we were making really sound judgments when we had to make decisions related to the technical aspects of racing.
Yeah. Think back, you talk about big events, and you have played an integral role in so many big events that have reshaped literally Indianapolis. Let's go back to the Pan American Games. And what was interesting, a lot of interesting things about that, I think, but among them, there's 87 Pan American Games, but I think it was Chile and Ecuador had both kind of backed out, right? So you not only had to put on this massive sporting event, but you only had maybe 30 months or so to put it together, when most cities have multiple years to put it together. What was that like?
Well, it was, ready, fire, aim, a phenomenal experience. I really didn't know what to expect. I do want to say this, Gary. I think it's really important if people really want to understand. While the Pan Am Games had the scale and international aspects, the thing for me that was foundational after the creation of the Indiana Sports Corporation was doing the National Sports Festival.
82,
so Yeah, and that was, all the Olympic sports for the Summer Olympic Games, competition among U.S. athletes. So you had to learn about all these venues. We had to build these venues. We had to have timing and scoring equipment, commissioners for the sports, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that I got involved in that as a volunteer in the fundraising and in the closing ceremonies. So to me, that without that, we couldn't have started with the Pan American Games. We wouldn't have had the venues. We wouldn't have had the expertise, the credibility. So very important. The games, the Pan American Games was, it was remarkable. And maybe we're just getting long in the tooth. The farther back you look, the more totally positive that it was. But we ended up selling 1 million tickets. We hosted all the countries of the hemisphere. We had some real issues, which caused some of us to be discussing the issues with Fidel Castro on multiple occasions. And I mean, an amazing number of stories, but ultimately 38,000 volunteers.
Wow.
So what does that say about this community? And that, that's sustained us through certainly the Super Bowl 10 years ago and all the sports, the phenomenal events that were hosted here this year, that cadre, that core base of volunteers, and the ethic of volunteers serving and making something happen. That was the secret sauce. And, I like to say, theoretically, we had 38,000 people who were uniformed, credentialed, and trained. but they're also eager and so positive that it wasn't like we had to micromanage people.
Yeah.
They would find a way to impress and to do a great job and for their love of their city to be contagious. And
but Mark, talk about, because you mentioned, because there's so many stories I know you could tell, but I remember, because I was a Cub reporter at Channel 6 here in Indianapolis covering the games. I remember it well. And there were all kinds of things. There was a threat of a boycott, right? Was Cuba thinking about that? Now, as I went back and did a little research, did you have a little secret meeting with Fidel Castro? Did you make a trip to Cuba? Talk about that. What that had to be amazing.
Yeah, it was. So when the U.S. Olympic Committee, after the National Sports Festival, found out that through a series of defaults, the Pan Am Games for '87 was available, they contacted the Sports Corp, Ted Boehm, and I think probably Jim Morris, and said, hey, would you like to be the U.S.'s candidate city? And those guys said, yeah, we've been looking for a bigger multi-sport event to go after. So I got asked to help, again, as a volunteer, put the bid together, and was in Mexico City with Mayor Hudnut and the president of the U.S. Olympic Committee. And we're competing head to head against one other city, Havana, Cuba, for the right to host the game. So we get it. And I don't know that we'd landed back in Indianapolis from Mexico City, where the Congress was, when we learned that Castro has announced that they're boycotting because we paid a $25 million bribe, allegedly, to steal the right to host the games from Havana, which, our whole budget was $25 million. That would have been every nickel we hoped to ever scrape together. But devastating, right? This is still the Cold War.
Yeah.
And they have great athletes in so many sports, boxing, what we used to call track and field, and on, baseball.
Baseball, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the absence of the political dynamic and so many great athletes would have really been a crushing blow. So there was some quiet back and forth, and we had some friends in Washington who probably helped a little bit, maybe even from our State Department, kind of key up the possibility of us going down there. And so Ted Boehm and myself and Sandy Knapp and General George Miller from the U.S. Olympic Committee flew down. It was in this little tiny, I called it Acme Air. I don't know where the plane showed up from. You couldn't just fly to Cuba in those days. And we get there and we're treated like royalty by everybody but the president. And finally, it's the last night. We're leaving the next morning, and there's a knock on the door of my hotel room in the Cuba Libre Hotel. And the Hispanic voice says, please get up. You're wanted. Get dressed. You're wanted for a high-level governmental meeting. So It's after midnight. You pull your pants on. You get in a Russian car. You're driven under the Palace of the Revolution, which is their combination it's their White House. And you cool your heels, and then you're asked to follow our guide, and you go 20 feet out in the hallway and you turn left. And I was the last one in our group to turn the corner, and there's Fidel in the full green fatigues and the hat, bigger than life. And when he gets to me, or I get to him, he says, you're very young to have this responsibility. And of course, I'd read everything I could get my hands on about him.
Yeah.
So I said, well, actually, when you successfully won the revolution and took Havana, you were 60 days younger than I am now. And he just lit up. I mean,
touche,
scored a point, I think, at that point. But then it was, honestly, I think about a 3-hour meeting where he probably did the speaking for, 2 hours and 40 minutes of it.
Yeah.
And over time, he went from, we can't possibly participate to kind of subtly laying out what became 5 conditions that if we could meet them, they'd get in. And I've talked, it's a longer story, but we got 4 of those 5 things done. We were able to communicate about that. We kind of got the word back that we were invited for a second visit, which we took to be good news. And we chartered a plane and took all the most important Olympic reporters from the United States with us, and a lot of the host committee volunteer leadership. And we kind of shook hands on the deal and went out to the media and he said, we're in. And then it really started getting fun.
Yeah, I'll bet.
Yeah. So that was 2 meetings. And then after it was all over, the city asked me to help make the pitch to get the World Baseball Championships. And that Congress was in Havana after the Pan Am Games. So I was back again. I'm just trying to do what they asked me to do. And I get woken up at night saying, get up, you're wanted for a high level meeting. And this time it was just him and 2 of us. And so, 3 meetings for probably 10 hours. And they were all different. They were all incredibly memorable.
Yeah, and I do remember many things about the Pan Am Games, including not far from where you are sitting right there, the opening ceremonies at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And at that time, it was so unusual to have any event whatsoever other than the Indianapolis 500 at the Speedway. I mean, this was long before NASCAR or any other event. So it was really a special day. President Bush was here. It was something.
Yeah, it was. I don't think it was unusual. I think it was unique.
Yeah.
And frankly, we, like the Olympics, you need a Coliseum like venue with a football stadium outside, track and field stadium on the outside of it. And we just don't have that in Indianapolis. So we had to get creative. I think Ted Boehm and Jim Morris went to see Tony George and Mary Holman George and asked if we could do this. And without hesitation, I'm told that they said yes.
Yeah.
I've got one story from that if we've got time. So about a week before the opening ceremonies is going to happen, I get called by kind of our security committee, who's the Indianapolis chief of police, the state superintendent of police, FBI, all these guys who never leave anything to the last minute, but they need to see me. So they come in, I'm a kid, and they say, it's rare, but sometimes there are bomb threats. And if a bomb threat gets called in, it's actually a civilian that has to make the decision to do whatever has to be done, whether it's postpone the event or whatever. And I'm already thinking, oh boy. Yeah. Oh boy. So they said, you're the guy for the opening ceremonies. So this is, just branded into my brain because that was a big day. And they said, when you get to the box of honor, you and your wife, Helen, will be seated with George Bush and with the president of the Pan American Organization, et cetera. And at your feet, there'll be a red phone. Now, this is 1987. So it's a rotary phone. Then it was like, don't worry, there'll be a little light on it. So if it does have to ring to call you, everybody won't know. You'll just see the light blinking. And I say, yeah, right. And somebody will be on the other end of the line that will tell me what to do, right? Because I'm going to need a little guidance here. I say, yeah, don't worry about it. So I completely forget about it. I give my little talk at the opening ceremonies. Helen and I sit down, and there's the red phone.
Oh, yeah.
And I just go, oh, God. So you put that out of your mind until well into the ceremonies when the light goes off.
Oh.
And now you can't breathe, right? I mean, this is a traumatic notion, a second. So I pick it up, and it's the show director for CBS arguing with the show director for Disney that the show is running long. You got to cut something out of the show, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going, you guys got the wrong number.
Oh,
there were just countless things that come to mind that made it a Forrest Gump-like experience.
Oh, that is amazing. Hey, I want to ask real quick before we go to the break about your time heading up ATP, the Association of Tennis Professionals. You have moved around to a number of jobs and responsibilities over your career, but that was one you spent 15 years leading ATP. So you actually moved to Florida, lived in France, south of France for a couple of years. And you're a tennis guy, right? You played tennis in college. And What was that like? How would you characterize your experience leading professional tennis?
Well, I loved it. It was the sport I was closest to. I really hadn't had a lot of international experience except for the Pan Am Games where we dealt with, this hemisphere. The sport was a mess. Its governing body, its governance had been awful. We believed the sport commercially was suboptimized. And so it was an exciting opportunity. I remember I spent 11 of my first 12 weeks with my family having relocated to Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida with me in Europe, because the European tournaments and players are already off the reservation. It was initially stabilizing it and then figuring out how to grow it. And, in the end of the day, I think we had a fair amount of success. It became much more international. We added new events in the Middle East and places like Dubai and Qatar and Tel Aviv. We put new tournaments throughout South America and in Southeast Asia. Players got paid a lot more money. Most of the tournaments were successful. And 15 years with that kind of torrid travel pace is a lot. So eventually it was time to come home.
Yeah. Well, you speak of coming home, spending time in Florida, the south of France, pretty nice places. But you always, I think, did you feel like you were always going to come back home?
Yeah. Listen, when I went to the tennis thing, I'd never worked at anything for more than 3 years. Something would pop up and we'd try to take on a new challenge. So, I didn't quit local clubs thinking I was not a resident thinking I'd be back in 3 years or whatever. And then it was 15 years and we ended up with 4 kids that were middle school, the youngest when we came home. Yeah, my family's here. For me, you couldn't. The thing that was always most motivating was this city and the way it can come together to do great things. So I was happy to be home.
Yeah, and we're glad you came back home as well. We'll have much more with Penske Entertainment CEO Mark Miles, including Indy's ultimate win hosting the Super Bowl. That and much more when we return.
First Person Advisors is now a subsidiary of National Financial Partners, the 5th largest insurance broker and consultant in the world. Develop your total reward strategies all in one place with the combination of First Person's local expertise and NFP's global resources and integrated solutions. Learn more at firstpersonadvisors.com.
Welcome back to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. My guest this week is Penske Entertainment CEO Mark Miles. Mark, you are through and through an Indy guy. You grew up just south of Broad Ripple, North Central High School. What was growing up in Indy like for you?
Yeah, well, it was sort of middle-class family. My dad was a lifer at Eli Lilly in the financial group. I think it was really normal. We walked 6 or 7 blocks to school, 70, public school, kindergarten through 8th grade. Yeah. And home for lunch, and then back again, then home in the evening. As I think you said, I could ride my bike to Arsenal Park for Little League. Scouts was at Northwood Christian Church right by School 70. Delivered papers, worked at a Baskin Robbins. I think with a paper route was probably my first way to make a little bit of money. And then I got involved in political campaigns by complete chance. And that's when I really began to see people making a difference. I think several years of being in political campaigns was really leadership boot camp. You just got to make things happen. It's time intensive. You got to get people on the same page. You got to have lots of balls in the air at the same time. And frankly, at least then, and I suspect it's true now, you could be young. And if you didn't care how much money you made, which is to say my first campaign was zero,
right?
You could earn more responsibility than you had any right to have, right? Then it's kind of sink or swim. So for me, it was a kind of a catalyst. And frankly, I didn't even know what networking meant. I'd never heard the word mentor, I'm sure, at that stage in my life. But if you're in all these campaigns, I don't care if you're an R or a D, you're meeting people who make a difference, who know everybody. And they know them not to know them. They know them to get stuff done. So by the time you've done that from, in my case, 74 through 80, I have a lot of great relationships, but they're authentic. It was, how are we going to raise this money, or how are we going to get these volunteers to knock on these doors, not networking per se.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what was happening. I was oblivious to what was going on, but it built for me in Indianapolis in particular, both a kind of confidence around being able to take a responsibility and try to get it done, and an incredible network of friends that, we really had relationships with.
Yeah, and you worked with some big names, obviously, in Republican politics, Hudnut, Lugar, Quayle. When was it that light went off? Was it when you were at Wabash College, where you played tennis, Hall of Fame tennis player there? You did great things on the tennis court. Was it politics? Did you get the bug when you were at Wabash?
It's funny. I have to go back and do the math, but I was in school, in grade school, and Birch Bayh was running for his first chance at the U.S. Senate. And a Democrat family with the kid who's my contemporary and a good buddy is all in for Birch Bayh. So we would get on public buses at 46th and Central and go down to the Bayh headquarters and stuff envelopes.
Oh,
and
no kidding.
You had to love that jingle, Gary. You might even be old enough to remember it.
Yeah.
And so it was just exciting, and it was fun to be part of something. I wasn't thinking about public policy, to be sure.
Right.
But so and my mother, I know, always cared, really impactful in thinking about what's important for our country more than the city, was Kennedy's assassination. Big deal for our generation. So I don't know, all those things just sort of congealed around me having an interest. And then I got involved really first in the Mayor Lugar's campaign against Birch Bayh in 74, working closely with Mitch Daniels, who became a lifelong friend, and a lot of other really talented people, including Lugar. And then one after another through Dan Quayle's campaign for the Senate in 1980.
Yeah. So you think back to Mayor Dick Lugar and the start of a transformation of a city in Indianapolis with the amateur sports movement and it just all of the things that happened. And who could have thought, of course, back then the Super Bowl was not what it became, but who would have thought that Indianapolis would ever be able to host a Super Bowl? And obviously it did in 2012. You were the chairman of the Super Bowl host committee. Talk about that moment. So many things went into it. I know in reading a little background, one of the things you're most proud of really is the legacy project that came out of the Super Bowl and really doing some transformational things on the Near East Side of Indianapolis.
Yeah, well, look, it's kind of like the precursor that mattered was the sports festival before the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
The effort to get it when we didn't get it, and Dallas did, was hugely important to us. And the foundation for that was the building of Lucas Oil Stadium. But Jack Swarbrick and Allison Millangton and the Sports Corp team did a great job of putting that bid together. On the merits, I think they should have won it, but they didn't. There's a mayoral election. I guess I'm a Republican, and Mayor Ballard is mayor-elect, and he calls me and asks me if I'd be willing to serve. And I had pretty much decided I didn't want to do anything else in sports, so that our civic time ought to be more like the legacy project, more human services and people impacting. But you couldn't say no, so I said yes. And so we went to work shoulder to shoulder with Allison Millangton and Jack, put the bid together. I, with Gene White, superintendent of public instruction, actually made the presentation to the team owners. Very important was Jim Irsay and his enormous credibility, and with Pullian, Bill, he knew every owner and every GM really well. They kind of managed the lobbying in the hallways. And I never doubted. I think my role was two things. It was pushing Allison and the team to do crazier things, like have eighth graders deliver the bids. And I'm not saying that was my idea. Frankly, I don't know. Somehow Jack and I convinced ourselves it would work. Or the zip line. A local friend of mine called me after those winter games and said, "Did you see the zip line in Calgary?" And I said, "No." And he said, "We should have one in the village." So I looked at him. We should have one in the village. It's a hell of an idea.
Yeah.
So we kept trying to infuse our Super Bowl village, right?
Yeah. I mean, that has become the standard, right?
It really did. And initially if you have too many committees, they can just grind an idea down to its to an uninspiring level. But we were trying to push for the highest vision of what it could be. And it became more than that, but to have a great space, to get some state and federal funding to make Georgia Street a cool space that was set up for that, and then program the hell out of it for 10 days. So that fundamentally, for the first 7 of those 10 days, it was for Hoosiers. And people kept coming from Evansville and Fort Wayne and all over. And then our guests showed up for the Super Bowl weekend. Our friends in Indiana kept coming, and it was damn near too many people. But that's what I tried to do, is just challenge us to do bigger, more inventive things. And I am not saying those were all my ideas. There's so many that weren't. And then the legacy project on the Near East Side, we kind of backed into that. The NFL made a lot to do of there should be a legacy project. Well, we'd been doing that for years here. Their idea was raise at least X amount of money to build or improve a Boys and Girls Club. And quite frankly, with all due respect to the Boys and Girls Clubs, we wanted more for ourselves. And so a friend called me and said, have you thought about neighborhood plans, whatever they're called? And I said, no, I don't even know what you're talking about. So an hour later, we're meeting in the Starbucks downtown on a Saturday, and he's telling me what these quality of life plans for 7 neighborhoods are that they've each done for themselves. They go, so what does that have to do with the Super Bowl? You think we're going to execute the transformation of a neighborhood? And then I met the people at the Bonner Center on the Near East Side and began to believe they knew what they were doing. They had enormous credibility with their neighbors. They had great expertise. They knew more about Newmarket's tax credits and TIFs and HOTIFs and all the rest of it. So maybe we could help them primarily by helping raise capital and knocking down political barriers and getting people to return the phone calls faster. And all in all, it was a lot of effort, but it was, very rewarding.
Yeah. Did you ever take a moment during the Super Bowl? You think back on that. Of course, the weather was unbelievable and, adding to the atmosphere downtown. But did you ever take a moment, during that week or so when you're downtown looking at what's happening to reflect on anything in any way? I mean, you're so busy doing a lot of different things, but take a moment to kind of take it all in.
The one poignant moment wasn't exactly the emotion that I think you're imagining. Yeah. It was, I think, on the Friday night of Super Bowl weekend when the village was like OD'd.
Right.
There were just too many people in that space. And I remember walking through there and seeing parents with baby strollers and going, get out of here. This is crazy.
Yeah. Right.
And it really was close to being out of control. But happily, people behaved and everybody wanted to just have a good time. So none of the things that could have gone off the rails did. But I remember, I've told this story, I was up in John Licklider's patio in the Conrad Hotel outside, not freezing at night.
Right.
And it looked like the string of cars back to back to back went to Illinois, coming in Washington Street. And then you could look down and see what was going on in the village. And it was, geez, I hope this works.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there were so many things, like there was a point when we didn't have enough law enforcement. So a call to the governor's office and the state police, who had been sort of positioned, show up like that. And the one little moment when it was getting a little rowdy, you got controlled in 5 minutes. It just all came together. And I suppose when we got through that night and then the Saturday night, which was less crowded, there was a bit of a breath of relief. But no, it was more just a sense of gratitude and pride.
Yeah. A lot of people talking now, what's next? City just hosted the College Football Playoff National Championship, another, huge event. We continue to host Final Fours. In your view, and I don't know how much thought you've given to it, is there a next big thing for Indianapolis to pursue? Some people say another Super Bowl. Others say, well, no, let's look another direction. Any thoughts on what that next big thing might be for Indianapolis?
Well, I don't think it's going to be the Super Bowl anytime real soon.
Right.
It's just the rotation of the southern cities and new stadia. Look, I think Indianapolis should get a lot of credit for essentially inventing an industry, right? For us, it was largely sports, and then that could bleed. Kind of the bolt-on was conventions and that business, and then hotels and all the rest of the downtown hospitality. I don't really feel yet like we have to blow it up and reinvent it. I mean, you referred to a couple of them, Gary, but imagine that we host, well, COVID screwed it up, but we were supposed to have the NBA All-Star game, the Big Ten basketball tournament, I think men and women, I may be overstating one of them, the NCAA Final Four. Instead, we just do the whole NCAA.
Right.
The college football championship game. I'm leaving something out in a year, or actually 13 months. I mean, that's the result of this 50 years, but it's an industry. And we got all that because of the track record and because of the belief of the rights holders that Indianapolis would nail it. So I just do more of it. You know, I think we got to be aggressive. We ought to be keep thinking about the spaces. I don't think Georgia Street's just Georgia Street. That we need that next big hotel. So we got to keep making the space more creative and more competitive. But the secret sauce of that right there, where you can bring everybody together and where a rights holder, whether it's amateur sport or professional sport, knows we'll nail it for them and it'll go away better than it came. Mm-hmm. We can do a whole lot more of this. And it's an industry that fuels the downtown hospitality. It fuels tax revenues, other tourism, and much more. So I don't have any brilliant idea about something completely new and different in that sector, really. I don't think it's one big thing. Actually, I have one big thing I'm not going to tell you about yet, but maybe something crazy we could do out here someday. I'll probably be too long in the tooth by the time it would be available. But
it must be pretty big then.
It would be a globally impactful thing, but it's awarded many years out. So, we have a hell of a golf course here.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd be interested in just having a regular PGA Tour event.
Right.
So who knows? Maybe somebody else sitting in this seat in the future could capitalize on an opportunity we could build over time to make a huge impact, not necessarily on the oval.
I like that. Something to think about. Hey, before we leave, what's next for Mark Miles? You know, so many people have said, hey, Mark Miles, he needs to run for mayor. He needs to get into politics. Is that something you're interested in politics, but would you be interested in running for office?
No, I knew that in 1974 when I traveled most every day with Dick Lugar, and then I saw what Hudnut and Dan Quayle went through. It's not for me. I'm not interested in politics. I'm interested in the city and the state. And I believe I can have the impact that is gratifying to me by being a private citizen and using the opportunities that come to us to help build the city and state. And so I'd rather not be ultra partisan, really. I'd rather just be somebody that elected officials who have an agenda that we can help with are comfortable trying to have us help.
Yeah. Mark Miles, it's been a real treat, as always, to chat. I appreciate you taking the time to join me on the podcast, and I really do appreciate your leadership on so many levels for Indianapolis and the state of Indiana. And again, been a real treat to reminisce a bit, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks, Gary. Love what you do.
All right. And thank you for joining us on this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. It is a weekly conversation with achievers in business, sports, entertainment, and beyond. And you can download all of our episodes and get Indiana business news 24/7. All you have to do is go to InsideIndianaBusiness.com. I'm Gary Dick. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.